And he plays it away, runs for that single, gets it there. It's a double 100 for the first time for Mahendra Singh Dhoni.
Hello and welcome to episode 40 of Radio Cricket. That's 40, the same age that Sachin Tendulkar will be when he announces his retirement from cricket and starts a crime-fighting duo with Harsha Bhogle. They foil the evil plots of arch-nemesis Ravi Shastri and have a bloody good time doing it. Imagine Batman and Robin, but with the sexual charisma of Harsha Bhogle. I'm Nishant Joshi, and I'm still reeling after missing out on those bloody Oscars. I blame it on the BCCI, handing out all the awards to their stooges as usual. That Ben Affleck bloke clearly is just Shah Rukh Khan with a bit of Fair and Lovely slapped on. I'm joined as usual by my lovely co-host, who is also cruelly robbed of an Oscar, but mainly because the Academy cruelly ignore Japanese ghost movies. It is James Marsh.
Yes, hello Nishant. Yes, very disappointed to see Dean Jones missing out on Best Supporting Actor this week. But anyway, how are you?
Yes, I'm doing very well, James. Obviously back from London now. Is a very beautiful time of year, below freezing in London, and then come back to a rather balmy Czech Republic. Very welcoming place it is, the Czech Republic. They just do a partial body cavity search for all foreigners these days.
You sound disappointed.
Yeah, you know I love those cavity searches, James. It's the highlight of my week.
Well, I say it is, Nishant. But on the subject of police probes, I suppose the big story of the week is the ongoing Pistorius investigation. Of course, he's been granted bail, but we had a slight involvement in this ourselves because we wrote a story for alternativecricket.com where we suggested that Channel 9 were going to sell some mini Pistorius memorabilia bats with realistic life-size bathroom door dents and KFC ketchup splatters. And the interesting thing here was that it was actually picked up by Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner, a lady called Liz Broderick, who kindly tweeted it out for us while asking, surely this is not true. So, I don't know, it seemed fairly extraordinary that someone would believe it. Maybe it reflects badly on her, maybe it reflects badly on Channel 9 that she would believe they would even do such a thing. But Nishant, of course, I know you're a keen observer on the news, so what's your latest take on the Pistorius business?
Well, James, as everybody knows, I do have quite a lot of sympathy for Oscar Pistorius. I accidentally kill my girlfriend on purpose all the time. So it could really happen to anyone, James. And speaking of another incident involving a cricket bat and a man who walked free thanks to a dodgy decision, Michael Clarke was given not out at bat pad on 38 in his first innings thanks to a real shocker from Kumar Dharmasena. He went on to make 130 as India won the first test by 8 wickets. What did you make of that, James?
Well, it was a lucky escape, of course, but overall Clarke was one of the bright spots in a fairly gloomy performance for Australia. Of course, he's well known as a great player of spin, you know, all the basics, plays it late, soft hands, etc. He judges length very well, and he made that wonderful 151 on debut in India in Bangalore back in 2004. I think in this innings, he just showed the value of discipline. He actually gave a fairly sort of anodyne quote about playing spin bowling. He said, playing spin bowling is no different to playing fast bowling. You've got to have a plan and stick to it, which is a fairly dull quote. But if you look at the way he played the star spinner in the match, Ravi Ashwin, it did demonstrate this discipline because throughout his first innings knock of 130, he only actually scored 6 runs on the offside against the spin, and he scored 34 on the onside. So I think that was the plan he had. You can score against Ashwin on the offside. During Kevin Peterson's 186 in Mumbai, he scored 30 on the offside and 22 on the onside. But it just showed, I think, that Clarke was able to rein himself in and just show this discipline. And he's just done it consistently against India. He's now scored 329 not out, 18, 210, 37, 130 and 31 in his last 5 knocks against Dhoni's men. So anyway, Nishant, but I mentioned Ashwin there. What was your take on the role of spin in the game overall?
You look at this Australian lineup where they have 6 left-handers and you think that another off-spinner to benefit would be Harbhajan Singh, but he really did come up short in his first test. And you look back to Harbhajan Singh's stats of about where he bowled it in the first innings. In the first innings, 80% runs scored of Harbhajan were square of the wicket, and this was backed up by the lengths he bowled. His average length in the first innings was about half a metre shorter than Ravi Ashwin's, and though both of them bowled at an average pace of just under 53 miles an hour, Harbhajan didn't give the ball any loop at all, and so the ball didn't really have as much of a chance to spin. At the end of the match, in his press conference, Ravi Ashwin attributed a lot of his success to his coach, Sunil Subramaniam, and he said that in the past few weeks he'd had 5 or 6 sessions where he'd corrected some of Ashwin's problems, and specifically he said that it was about ensuring that the toe of Ashwin's back foot should be in a straight line with the heel of his front foot, and this meant that it automatically aligned the shoulder and ensured that it's in the right direction of the intended target. And Ashwin said that this made the whole feel of his bowling action feel a lot more natural. So James, I know you're a huge Ashwin fan as well. What did you make of his performance in this test?
Well, I am, to be honest, but I think it was quite interesting because at the start of the series, he had a bit of a sort of Monty Panesar sort of epiphany, and he said that, he realised he was perhaps trying too many variations. So he said he was just going to go back to the basics, concentrate on line, and in particular flight, and I think that did reap rewards here. You saw one dismissal when he got Cowan, when Cowan charged down the wicket to him. Now, you could say that there are candles less hot-headed than the Australian opener was at that point. And also, it's worth noting that he'd actually hit 6 in the previous over off Harbhajan, and obviously Baji has not got the credit he deserves for that wicket. But
it was all set up, James.
I just thought that bit of flight from Ashwin was indicative of the confidence that he's perhaps regained. I'd just like to mention Jadeja as well, because obviously listeners will be disappointed he wasn't mentioned for 1 week on the pod. And I'd just like to say, I think he's someone surprisingly free of ego for a guy with so many triple tons and a 7-figure IPL contract to his name. He did,
a very humble man, James.
Well,
very humble.
He is, but he did get turn in the second innings, albeit on a pitch which by then had got more spite than a drunk divorcee at a wedding. But in the first, he bowled 36 overs of his tight darts, and they went for just a miserly 1.97 an over, as well as picking up 2 wickets. So, cricket is a bit like spots at times. Squeezing can get results. So, yes, he's almost a sort of Michael Yardy type figure in this Indian attack. But just coming back...
I'm not sure he's that good, James.
Well, perhaps not. That is rather high praise. But anyway, just coming back to Ashwin, I think it's also noticeable that he varied his line a little bit. He was prepared to pitch more balls actually on the stumps, which you might expect for someone with this carom ball a little bit. But if you actually look at Nathan Lyon, his line was just too monotonous. It was just continually outside off stump. He didn't make the batsman play enough, and we might praise spinners for having this accuracy and consistency of line, but I think against India at home, this sort of monotony of line just isn't going to work. But Nishan, I don't know if maybe that's a bit unfair on Lyon. What did you make of his performance?
Well, as I mentioned before, Nathan Lyon had pretty horrific match figures. His first innings figures were 47 overs, 3 for 215, and he bowled just 1 maiden in there, and that is the most overs in an innings by any bowler who's bowled fewer than 2 maidens. And to be honest, James, I think Nathan Lyon was exceptionally hard done by those figures. I think Michael Clarke offered him no support whatsoever with the field settings, and his lack of dot balls was kind of indicative of just how difficult Nathan Lyon had it with the fields. He had he didn't really have an in-out field, which I do really like to see for an attacking off-spinner in a test. He kind of had an in-between grey zone sort of field, where singles were easy to come by, boundaries were easy to come by, and wickets were hard to come by for Nathan Lyon, even though he did bowl plenty of decent wicket-taking deliveries. As you mentioned, James, I think the key point was that even though he bowled a similar line to Ashwin, I thought even though Nathan Lyon flighted the ball pretty well as well, he just didn't have that variety, that one... perhaps not even a deucer, but the one which goes straight on, the one which Harbhajan has mastered as a stock delivery. I think that if Nathan Lyon just had a bit more variety to his line and length, maybe his flight and loop and pace, then he could become a really, really decent bowler for the rest of the series.
But of course, Nishal, we must mention the performance of the match, even more so than Ashwin, and that was MS Dhoni's 224 off 265 balls. It was comfortably the highest ever score for an Indian wicketkeeper, the highest ever score for an Indian number 6, overtaking Dravid's iconic 180 at Eden Gardens in 2001. So it was actually quite appropriate that VVS was commentating on this knock. what I was impressed with was that there were incredible fluctuations of scoring rate in this innings, and there was the way that he really took on the second new ball when he was batting with Kohli. Between them, they scored 54 runs in 8 overs, and then of course Kohli fell, which was an act of profligacy which I thought India might pay for. It's worth noting that Kohli's now got 4 test tons, but his highest one is only 116. But anyway, Dhoni then consolidated a little bit, and then he launched an astonishing assault for the 9th wicket stand of 140 when him and Kumar scored at 4.49 an over, which is really quite incredible. So for me, it was a very sort of Muhammad Ali type masterclass of attack and defence, which left Australia groping on the canvas by the end. So Nishant, was this just the greatest ever innings by an India Cements vice president, or was it the greatest innings of all time by anyone?
Well, James, it was the 3rd highest ever score by a wicketkeeper in tests, and many people say that Dhoni's knock was a career-defining innings and that he's proved his critics wrong, but to be honest, I don't buy it for a second. There's plenty of sycophancy coming out of the woodworks just after this one innings, and perhaps giving after his 99 in defeat in his last test against England. And to be honest, people ask whether it's a career-defining innings, but for me, Dhoni's test career has always been defined by chancy 50s in losing knocks, and if we're being brutally honest, then it's also been defined by back-to-back whitewashes in England and Australia. And as everyone knows who's been tuning into this podcast for the last 18 months or so, I've always maintained that Dhoni is an amazing leader, but as a test captain, he just doesn't have the technical nous required. He has rightly earned plenty of praise for this innings, which was a match-winning one. It did earn him man of the match ahead of Ashwin for his 12 wickets. But at the end of the day, you can't just have a quick shower and wash 8-0 out of your system. And now to South Africa, where the Proteas have completed a 3-0 whitewash of Pakistan in the Test series. And for me, one thing that stood out was kind of bizarre statistic about Saeed Ajmal, who was supposed to be the spearhead for Pakistan, and he was to an extent, but in the first test at Johannesburg, Saeed Ajmal went wicketless for the first time in his test career after bowling 20 overs or more, and he repeated the feat in the 3rd test as well at Centurion. And you think that he had a pretty bad series based on those 2 outings, but then you go to the 2nd test, which was at Cape Town, and Saeed Ajmal actually picked up a 10-for. So Saeed Ajmal picked up just 1 wicket in the 1st test, no wickets in the 3rd test, and 10 wickets in the 2nd test. So it is quite a contrast. And James, I believe you got some statistical analysis behind why that might be.
Yeah, just one thing I picked up on with Ajmal was that at Cape Town he bowled much more balls outside leg to right-handers, even though they weren't wicket-taker deliveries, or sometimes not even doosras. And in fact, he only actually took 1 wicket with the doosra at Cape Town, and that was Duplessis. But I think it just planted a little bit more doubt. At Centurion, his line was almost exclusively on the stumps or outside off, almost a sort of Lyon-esque line, if you like. So I don't know if that was a factor. There was also a little bit more bounce at Wanderers as well, and Ajmal bowled far more deliveries above stump height or projected to be so by Hawkeye. But Nishant, I guess it's probably a little bit unfair to focus on Ajmal as the source of Pakistan's woes. Obviously, it was their batting which let them down again. I think this was illustrated quite well during Kyle Abbott's debut figures of 7 for 29. Now, he's a young fellow who's come in. He bowled pretty well, but maybe nothing spectacular. So, Nishant, what did you make of his performance and Pakistan's batting against him?
I think Christmas came early for Kyle Abbott, to be honest. He must be thinking this Test cricket is a very easy game. He picked up his first Test wicket in his first over, and it was bowled with a short and wide one, which was cut straight to gully. So you think, okay, fair enough. And then he goes on and picks up 7 for, with not bad deliveries, but they were decent medium pace deliveries, which are all in that channel just outside off stump. But Pakistan really played terribly against him. To an extent, Kyle Abbott really reminded me of Jack Cullis, who of course wasn't playing in that final test at Centurion. In that, he was pretty much bowling medium pace outswingers. He was bowling heavy balls. He has a very strong upper body build, so he does get that sort of heavy ball through the batsman. Pakistan essentially played Kyle Abbott as I'd expected them to play Dale Steyn in that final test, which was run shit scared from him. And to be honest, they backed away, they angled the bat towards the slips as if they were practicing slip catching. And To be honest, I think it was one of the easiest seventhers I've ever seen. And now just a bit on Pakistan's opening partnership, which averaged just 12 runs throughout the series. Mohammad Hafeez got out for 2 ducks during the series as well, so Pakistan were really surrounded very early on throughout the series. And really interesting point is that Mohammad Hafeez averaged just 1.25 runs against Dale Steyn during the series. And Hafeez in the post-match press conference after the third test at Centurion said, "I had a tough series." And to that I'd say, no mate, if you're scoring gritty 20s and 30s and failing to capitalise on your starts, then you can say you've had a tough series. If you're averaging less than the price of a Happy Meal, the only correct way to express your emotions is to burst into tears every time someone mentions the name Dale Steyn. And to be honest, James, if they called Mohammad Hafeez a professor, you've got to worry about the rest of the Pakistan team.
Well, I've actually been doing some studying myself, Nishant, and the stats for South Africa are pretty impressive. They've won their last 6 tests, 3 of them by an innings. They've won 6 series on the trot, and they're actually unbeaten in their last 15 test matches. So just moving forward, they've got a tour of Pakistan in November. So I suppose the obvious weakness people might bring up there is that they have a lack of a front-line spinner. I've been very impressed with Robin Peterson, both in this series and going back to the one in Australia. He took 6 wickets in the deciding test in Perth, which really isn't to be sniffed at on the WACA pitch, but it's whether he can push on and maybe become a real front-line spinner rather than just a more than handy chipper inner with both bat and ball. But Nishant, where do you see this South African side in the pantheon of greatness?
Well, James, if you look at the current Test World 11 that you'd have, you've got Hashim Amla as the world's #1 batsman. You've got AB de Villiers and Jacques Kallis also in the top 10. Bowling-wise, you've got Dale Steyn as #1, and he has been for some time. You've got Vernon Philander, who's not far behind. You've also got Morne Morkel in the top 10 as well. So you've got 6 of the current South Africa Test 11 in the world's top 10 for both disciplines. If you just look at Steyn's aggression, it is pretty unique in the cricketing world right now. In the final test, with not much to play for, and the game well in South Africa's balance, Dale Steyn had a bit of a send-off to Yunus Khan, who he bowled off an inside edge, and he just pointed him towards the pavilion, which before he gave him a bit of a visceral sort of fist pump. And it just reminded me that Dale Steyn is almost a bit like Mike Tyson in terms of fast bowlers, but only in a bit of a "I want to eat your children" sort of way. Inappropriate Englishman news, and following in the long line of English cricketers to get blooded in Australia, Matt Coles and Ben Stokes of the England Lions were sent home after repeated, allegedly drunken misdemeanours. James, what do you make of it all? As an Englishman, you must be very proud.
Well, I'd probably say unsurprised rather than proud, but it does perhaps provide an appropriate end to what's been a horror tour for the England Lions. They've yet to win a game thus far, but Nishant, I don't know what it is about the English once they get to the Antipodes. Of course, in Australia, a while back, there was that group of lads who were fined for stealing a penguin whilst drunk, although probably the worst bird-related offences in the region have been committed by Graham Thorpe, who on a couple of tours of New Zealand was alleged to have almost single-handedly ruined the local youth hosteling business by inviting any pretty young backpacker he met to stay at his hotel instead. It's very easy to condemn people like Coles and Stokes for wasting such an amazing opportunity, but taking alcohol out of the English game is like trying to watch that new health drink advert with Lionel Messi playing cricket without wanting to tear out your eyes. Almost impossible. From Botham to Flintoff to Graham Swan's cat, booze runs through English cricket's veins like Ashwin runs through Australian batsmen. When Flintoff stole that pedalo during the 2007 World Cup in the Caribbean, he'd been out not with a group of other players, not with a group of high-spirited fans, but with Jeremy Snape, the team psychologist, for heaven's sake. It is indeed a mucky end to a mucky tour, but I think both Coles and Stokes are good enough not to let it turn their subsequent careers into one long sorry hangover.
Well, as we mentioned at the start of the podcast, it was Oscar week this week, and James, I believe you have more on a few cricketers who were even more unlucky than yourself.
Well, indeed, Nishant. And of course, Stuart Broad yet again has lost out in the best makeup category. I don't know why it happens every year. Of course, best sound effects. I thought Kane Williamson would be in for a shout for the noise he made when Dale Steyn hit him in the groin. A terrifyingly accurate portrayal of every man's worst psychological nightmare. And I really thought best actor in a leading role would go to Steve Davis for his role as Steve Davis in the popular screwball comedy Adventures of an ICC Elite Panel Umpire. But sadly not. But for this week, it's time for us to say, cut. I've been James Marsh.
And I've been Nishant Joshi, and I leave you with the news that horse meat has been found in IKEA meatballs. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it just goes to prove the old adage, you can lead a horse to water, and then you can drown that horse, and then you can ground it into processed meat. Goodbye.
I think it was a very poor performance, one of the worst things I have ever seen done on a cricket field. Good night.